Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with a Bard class deck. This deck is one of our donation decks of the week. It comes from Lexa. Thank you for supporting the channel, Lexa. This is Bard class in green, white, red. Now, Bard class obviously is not a legendary creature, so it is not our commander, but it is a deck that revolves around it. So as we explain our commanders to create this deck, we're also going to explain Bard class so we can kind of understand what's going on. Alexa says, here's the Bard class aggro deck I've been working on. Added the third color so I can find Bard class easier. Wondering if you had any suggestions on it. Absolutely, I have some suggestions. I really like the deck as it is, but I have a few kind of key cards and directions to think about. And I'm excited, so let's just get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So this deck is kind of like a secret commander style deck, right? Where our commander is within the deck, but our commander is not even a creature, it is Bard class. Bard class is a class enchantment, which means it gains abilities. It starts with this first little text up here, and then as we pay mana, we access more and more of its abilities. So Bard class by itself just says legendary creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them, which is great because we are playing a legendary matters deck. But it's that second ability that we really want. This for a red and a green, so basically it's cost twice. It says legendary spells you cast cost a red and a green less to cast. This will only reduce the colored mana and nothing beyond that. Then we have the final ability, which is for 3 red and a green. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, you get to exile the top 2 cards of your deck and you have a turn to play them. So what I really like about all of this is I feel like this card solves a lot of problems that a deck, like an aggro deck, might have. It increases the strength of your creatures, it reduces the mana cost and helps your mana, and then finally it provides card advantage. I don't know how often we're going to aim to put it to level 3, but getting to level 2 is kind of a must and really just enables the deck to work. So let's see what commanders we're playing alongside that. We're playing some Friends Forever commanders, which is Max and Mike, or Elmar and Othelem. However you'd like to play them. I like the Universes Within, some people like the Universes Beyond, but the cards are the same. So Max is a 3/2 legendary human with haste in red and green. Notably, when you have Bard class out, she costs 1 mana, which is dramatic, and says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, untap target creature, then investigate. This is fantastic because the deck with Bard class out can very easily cast 2 spells a turn. The untap's okay, mainly the card advantage with the clue token is really nice. We also have Mike here, Mike to add our white mana. Mike is a 2/2 green-white human, and they have the ability for 2 and a tap, choose target creature, and that died this turn, right? Your graveyard. So target creature that died, target creature you own, I guess, that died this turn and returned to the battlefield tapped. If your opponent had control over your creature, you can get it back this way. If it dies, I don't think that's going to be really relevant. I think this is kind of more niche than the other one. There is a third, another option in these Friends Forever decks. We have it in the deck itself, and that's Sophina. Let's see where I can find them. Sophina here, or Chief Jim Hopper, would be another option that adds white but stays within those color, that kind of color, Naya color pairing. And here we have Menace whenever they attack, investigate once for each non-token attacking creature. I personally like this one better, but I have even more of another suggestion for commanders for this deck, mainly because, I'm considering this a Bard class deck, and our commanders are just other tools we can change up to get there. However, I think either way, these Friends Forever, they work perfectly well, they do the job nice, and having 2 legendary creatures and 2 cards in your command zone is rather good. Talking about the deck itself, I could safely just say this is good. I think this is just what it aims to do. It's very clearly a first draft where half of our deck is creatures. We've got, including our commanders, literally 50 of 100 cards are creatures. And that's fine. I don't really see that being a problem. I think over time you might want to reduce that number, maybe cut like 4 or 5 just to play a few more utility spells. But as it is, and outside of additions I'm going to suggest, I think the deck is fine. There's a very nice curve where it goes 1, 2, 3 with Blasphemous Act at 9, and sorry, I forgot to say 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and Blasphemous Act at 9, and these spells are just fine. The curve is very, very good. One can say 4 is a bit high, like the number of 4 drops in our deck, but that's not entirely true because it is the highest mana cost of the deck. If we're not going to play a lot of ramp, which we're not, we're playing, Soul Ring and the Talismans, I think this is fine. If we really wanted to push it, we could play some Mana Dorks, but it's not very necessary as our main plan is to get something like Bard class out and reduce the cost of almost all of these spells. And when you start thinking of that, these spells each being like all the 4s are 2, well, not all, but the majority of 4s are 2s, the majority of 3s are 1s, and a large amount of these 2s are 0s, then it becomes easier and easier to kind of imagine how the deck curves out. We have a few tutors. Idyllic Tutor gets us Bard class. Search for Glory does not get Bard class. I keep reading the saga and assuming it does, but it is not a saga, it is a class. Enlightened Tutor also gets Bard class. And then we have, really good removal, 1 board clear, a bunch of removal, Lightning Bolt, Path, and Swords, which to me are the best ones. Flowering of the White Tree is really, really nice, and War of the Last Alliance as a creature tutor twice is also very, very good. So if we just kind of stopped here, 36 lands, I didn't say, but 36 lands is also just fine. This is perfectly fine. As the deck is now, I think it's just in a really good place. You could sleeve this up and play it and kind of feel out what it's missing. Because I think at this point, my questions are, do we want more ramp? Do we want more card draw? And how much more do we want? In a deck like this that works so smoothly on one plan, I think the only way we're going to figure that out is by testing it. That being said, I do have some additions. Let's go through the commanders. So the first one I wanted to talk about is Kutsil. Kutsil, I think, is very, very strong in a deck like this. Both because, one, this whole your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. The silence effect is incredibly powerful no matter how you cut it, especially in an aggro deck and a deck that might want to, play, 5 or 6 creatures in one turn. Being able to know you'll be able to do that without your opponents casting spells is really, really nice. Do remember that this doesn't mean they can't do anything. Abilities, cycling, and the like will all still work, but no counter magic in terms of counter spells, which is nice. Then they have the whole mechanic of whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power hits a player, draw a card. That means if you can hit all 3 opponents, you'll draw 3 cards. This works obviously very, very well with Bard class, as Bard class provides that first +1/+1 counter that enables this ability to go off. So really nice synergy. Even though we can't reduce the white mana and Kutsil will always be 1 and a white, I still think this is very much so one of the strongest legendaries we can put in the deck, and I'd really like it in there immediately. Then we have Tesar. Tesar I kind of like. I'm not sure to what degree I like them. I think in a more reanimation themed side of this deck, which white has gotten a lot of really good cards recently for reanimation. I'm thinking of like Helping Hand, which reanimates any 3 mana creature for 1 mana, Unearth in white as I hear often, and Tesar being able to reanimate any 3 mana creature or less whenever you cast a historic spell, which is any legendary spell in your deck, including 1 saga and your artifacts. Like that's pretty good. But with that in mind, I think I'd like to enable this strategy a little more if I wanted to go in this direction. Not only play more of those white reanimation spells, I like to play Faithless Looting, a bunch of looting or rummage in red. There's some creatures like, I can't remember her name, but from the newest set we have, let me see if I can find it right now while we're here. Not the newest set, but from Exelon in red, we have a very good legendary creature, which I don't know if we're actually playing, but Inti. I actually don't know if that's a woman. Inti, whoever they are very good for discarding cards out of your hand and giving trample and getting more card draw through the exiling. So having a few, and I know there are more creatures, legendary creatures that do things like this. So if we wanted to lean into this side, have a bunch of discard, have a bunch of rummage, and then have a bunch of white to reanimate or green to return from graveyard to hand, there could be a cool kind of mechanic there. It is a different direction to go into the deck, and one, honestly, I'm not too interested in, but it did cross my mind, so I wanted to bring it up as an option. I think that would be a really neat option because all of the rummaging and looting makes it easier to find Bard class, but I'm not entirely sure what that deck looks like and how strong it would be. Moving on, Rien, Angel of Rebirth, is a card I really like, and a card I would suggest as an alternative commander for the deck. Rien, I think, works... I find the Friends Forever partners are really good cards, but they tend to be more either investigative focused or just kind of value. And here I feel like they're just kind of value. Whereas Rien, I feel, works a lot better in the actual strategy of the deck. One, she obviously boosts all of our creatures because the majority of our creatures are multicolored, because we want to use Bard class to take the red and the green, so the majority of our creatures are at least gruel. So almost all of our creatures get +1/+0. She is red and green, so she gets that mana reduction as well. But most importantly, this line of text that says, whenever another multicolor creature you control dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So the way this works is that Rien doesn't need to be on the battlefield during the end of that turn. She just needs to see these people die. And so this forms like a kind of protection around board clears, because if they wipe the board with Rien out, you just get all of your creatures back immediately. And I find this mechanic, like not just in addition to like cards like Hajar, which is a very, very powerful card that sacrifices to give all of your creatures indestructible. Like other sacrifice creatures or other ways to have your creatures die in combat or just being aggressive with them allows them to keep coming back. And when you mix in Bard class, we have this kind of like cycle of reducing mana costs on creatures and then getting them back to cast again and getting to cast more spells. And then finally, when you think of this this legendary creature or this commander with that third ability on Bard class, that every time we cast that creature, we get to pseudo draw 2. That loop gets even better because every time you complete a loop, all of a sudden you are getting more and more advantage. So to me, this is a really, really good card. I really like that she also flies. I think that's pretty nominal to get some hits in. A 5/4 is nothing to scoff at. With Bard class, she gets to 6 power, and that puts us 1 power away from 7. For those who don't know or don't think this way, when it comes to command, what's it called again? Commander damage, right? Like the 21 you're trying to hit with your commander. That's something that doesn't really happen in Commander very often, if ever. But once your commander's power hits 7, that's kind of the sweet spot. The sweet spots are 7 and 11, because 11 is 2 turn and then obviously 21, but 11 is 2 attacks, 7 is 3 attacks. Rien coming in as a 6/5 from Bard class and then can be very, very easily boosted to 7 and above by other cards makes her a really good attacking commander, as she threatens any of your opponents to take them out in 3 attacks. And so overall, I really like this. If I was building this deck, I think I would have Rien as our commander, but that's just the way I would play it. Moving on, the last kind of legendary creature, just for legendary creature matters, I want to add is Rocco. Rocco, I feel like, is just perfect in this deck, as the majority of your mana costs in your deck are really, really cheap. And so we can pull out a number of creatures very cheaply with Rocco. That's not even including the fact that we can reduce the non-X cost of Rocco with Bard class, and all of a sudden we are paying 1 additional mana, 1 white, to pull any creature out of our deck onto the battlefield. Kind of a Green Sun Zenith. And I really, really do like that. I think that's very, very strong and definitely worth playing. I think there's definitely some targets that are better than others. Hajar comes to mind as being a very strong one, but as you play the deck and as you find the creatures you want to bring out, I think Rocco will just get better and better. So big fan of this, and I think even at a certain point, you're willing to like pay 6 with this guy to grab another 3 mana creature, especially with the Bard class out, when that becomes only, 4 mana, and he's a 4/2. Very, very good. Kamal's Druidic Vow. This is kind of a finisher card that I was thinking of. These are a few more cards on the legendary theme. I think they're the last one, then what next one's not legendary themed, but is legendary. This is an interesting card. So generally this is thought of as a finisher, and I do have finishers at the end of this list, but I think a deck like this gets to play this as a value play, right? This is reveal the top X cards and legendary or land cards that are 3 mana or sorry, X mana or less go onto the battlefield. So traditionally, a lot of people play this as you pump X as high as you can, but in a deck like this, you could just cast this for 5 or 6 mana, right? Looking at the top 4 or the top 3 and putting all the 3s or all the 4s and below out is very reasonable in this deck, especially when the majority of your creatures are 3 mana or less. I think you can put this as, just a turn where you put X as 3, kind of a value turn. Play it as like a super divination where you're hoping to get at least 2 legendary creatures on the battlefield, maybe 3. I think that's pretty cool. Obviously, this gets much better with the option of pumping a ton of mana into it, but because of that kind of mobility, or what would we call it? Modular. The modularity. Is that a word? The modularity of a card like this is really, really attractive to me. I think it would be considered a 5 mana spell at minimum for me, but even then, since you're not playing any 5 mana spells, I think you can add it as your first one to your deck pretty easily. Hero's Podium is another legendary, but this one, I did forget about this one. This is one more that matters in legendary, and apparently, yes, it's in Doctor Who. Have fun. This card is obviously very, very cool. It provides a substantial bonus to your deck in terms of the bonus to your creatures. I think even with like a non-generous 3 creatures, giving +2/+2 to all your creatures is very, very good. And after that, as soon as you play a 3rd or 4th creature, that bonus just keeps growing and growing, and I really like that. But something I like even more, this X tap ability, when half of your deck is legendary creatures, it is really nice to be able to just occasionally just put 1 mana into this. Basically, you play the best turn you can, and then you dump the remaining mana on your last opponent's end step to get another card. And at a certain point, the fact that you can just put 1 mana into it and have a pretty good chance of flipping a legendary creature is really, really good, and I do like that. I think there's a lot of that text of 5 mana, 1 mana tap draw card, I think is almost good enough. So this is just gravy. And some would say the same thing in reverse, that this part is good enough and this is just gravy. And with that in mind, I think this is a very, very good card to add to your deck. One more 5 mana card is Doors of Durian. This just kind of caught my eye, once again for the legendary text right here. But the fact that it says whenever you attack, scry 2, reveal the top card and put it on the battlefield tapped and attacking. There's some stuff with dwarves and elves. You don't need to worry about that. I don't think you should worry about trying to trigger that. Instead, just thinking about this as a 5 mana spell that's kind of a sneak attack, where every time you attack, you just have a chance at looking at the top 3 cards, right? Because you scry 2 and you scry them both to the bottom if they're not creatures, to get a creature put on the battlefield tapped and attacking. I think this is fine. I don't think it's like super, super good, but you are playing an aggro deck. You are playing very, very aggressively. I think it's just nice to not only have the scry, but have an extra attacker every attack. I think that's pretty good. So maybe not the most interesting one, but I do like it. Now there's this element to the deck that really interests me, and it's a bit of, like, we call this Bard class aggro, and that's what I'll write it as, but there is a storm element to this. We are reducing the mana cost of our spells, of the majority of our spells, dramatically, and then we are aiming to use an ability that makes it so every time we cast a spell, we get to exile the top 2 spells of our deck. That's, I think, really, really good. So having something like Goblin Anarchomancer, who's a traditional, more of a storm card, can work really well in these decks. Now, all of our 2 mana cards don't really get much of an effect, except for the ones that have a colorless pip in them. But starting at 3 mana, this starts making the majority of our creatures free. And I really, really like that. This also makes Max, if we're going to continue playing Max, she becomes free as she is 1 red-green with Bard class out and Goblin Anarchomancer out. That initial cast is free, which is really, really cool. So I want to play this, and I want to play a few more Storm cards in Battle Hymn, which adds us a red for each creature you control. A majority of our creatures just start costing colorless mana, so Battle Hymn will pay for that, which is really, really nice. Jessica's Will, which is a bit expensive, but I think I'd be amiss to not add it here. Very strong card for both its modes. Escape to the Wilds is a traditional kind of Storm card. Once again, it's 5 mana. I feel like I'm adding a lot of 5 mana cards, so maybe pick and choose. But if you go into this Storm direction, this could be a really good card that kind of fills in for the last ability of Bard class, while also getting you an extra land and getting you 2 turns of spells to cast. Finally, Treasonous Ogre, that's just another generic red Storm card where you start paying life to add red mana, and definitely at a certain point in this game with Bard class out, this allows you to cast honestly like a majority of the cards out of your deck for life instead of mana. And when you are aggro and you are playing a 40 life game, you have the life to spend to put more cards into play. And like all of these apply when Bard class is on 3, you just start running through your deck incredibly fast, right? So this is another card that catches my eye quite a bit. Then this is either for the aggro side or for the Storm side, Mass Hysteria and Concordant Crossroads. If you watch my videos, you know these are cards I absolutely love. I'll give the spiel. The spiel is that both of these cards give all creatures haste, including your opponent's creatures. That incentivizes your opponents to attack each other or just attack in general. Every creature they attack with is a blocker you don't have to deal with. And the idea is as the aggro deck, you will have the biggest creatures, you will have the strongest attacks, and you will have to worry about your life total the least. So having these out is just both really, really good in terms of making all your creatures much stronger, but it tends to make your attacks freer. So I really, really like both of them here. Then we have Moonblessed Cleric, a card I really like because it just lets us look for... It's just another card to get Bard class. It's a little boring. It is just a 3 mana Human Elf Cleric, and it just puts Bard class on top. But honestly, with a deck that needs that, the whole point is to play Bard class, having just another ability to do that is really, really nice. A slightly more interesting version of this card is Sterling Grove. This is this is more intended for enchantment decks, but works really well here, where instead of thinking of it as a green-white giving Shroud, think of it as a 1 green-white to tutor Bard class on top of your deck. Same idea, unfortunately not into your hand, but onto your deck, and the next turn you get Bard class. The other thing that's nice though is that this works even better if you already have Bard class, because you can throw out Sterling Grove, and Sterling Grove will protect Bard class with Shroud, which is very, very nice. Then I have finishers. Taunt from the Rampart seems really, really interesting, much like how Concordant Crossroads and Mass Hysteria have this whole kind of aggression and distraction element to it for your opponents. Taunt from the Rampart kind of exactly works that way for 2 turns, where first you goad all your opponent's creatures, then they just can't block. So you have a free attack right away, and then by the time it gets to your next turn, considering almost all of your opponent's creatures have attacked freely into your other opponent's creatures, they should be almost all tapped, and now you can have a second attack that's also free. I think in aggro decks in Boros, this is a very, very good finisher because it almost guarantees to take out 1 or 2 opponents. With the army you have, plus the incidental damage of your opponents at each other, you're just going to be in a really good place in order to defeat them. And those are the additions I would put into this deck. I really do like how it is already. A lot of my additions are just trying to give us more of a finisher or more of a direction, and then a lot of directions I think that are a little more boring but we can go into, such as playing Harmonize, such as playing just Faithless Looting and things like that to kind of dig through more of our deck. But at this point, I think we need to see a little more of the deck to play test it a little bit and get a little more of an idea of how it performs. Because right now, it looks like a lot of fun, and until we see what it's missing, we don't know which direction to go in. I hope this has been helpful. This is really, really fun. I do love hidden card commanders, especially when they are not creatures themselves. A Bard class commander is very, very interesting to me. Thank you so much for sending the deck, Lexa. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm excited to hear how this deck goes. Please let me know when you build it and play it, how it does, and what you feel like it needs to be, like, what are the next steps, because I do really think this can be a very fun deck, and there's so many directions to take it into that I'm just curious what we're going to do with it. All right, good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there is a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.